So moving right on, our next speaker is a man who is well known to most of us. He's been around for a good long while. He's no stranger to this stage because he's been a presenter several times at our conferences. In fact, I think he probably holds the record for the most time serving as a plenary speaker. Over the years, I've learned a tremendous amount from Paul, and I highly respect his grasp of the big picture and his insight into approaches to litigation. Paul has a distinguished career in the U.S. Army, first as a ranger in infantry office. And he took a little time out from that to get a law degree and went right back for 6 more years in the Army as a JAG attorney. And served 2 tours in Afghanistan while he was doing that. Following his Army career, he did a year of clerking for Neil Gorsuch before he was a Supreme Court justice. Paul also has a master's in business administration and management, and that kind of supports his current business model. He's not just an attorney, but he's a business consultant also, and he does a lot of work with people on overall business operations. So he is one of our most faithful and successful warriors. He's led or assisted in numerous high-profile cases, including premises restrictions, social media use, and due process for out-of-state registrants. So would you please welcome to the stage NARSOL's Attorney and General Counsel, Mr. Paul Dubbeling.
Microphone, there it is. Yeah, now it's on. It's also now about on a 1/10 of a second delay into my own ears, so that's going to be fun. Okay, so what I wanted to do is something a little bit different. Recently I had the wonderful opportunity to talk with some of the leadership from the NCRSOL, the North Carolina local affiliate. And we were sitting down and just sort of thinking about, okay, how do we systematize the way we think about what NCRSOL is trying to do, right? Because there's a lot of conflicting currents going on in this community. There's a lot of different impulses, a lot of different goals. And what I wanted to do was sit down and try to think through, okay, can we get a big picture look at what we're actually trying to do, and then break that down in a way that allows to think about it more systematically so that we can come up with concrete plans to achieve specific objectives. So, right on the one hand, it's clear. We want to reform registry laws. And I think most people here would say, okay, the ultimate objective would be the abolishment of registry laws. I would suggest that while that's fine as an ultimate objective, it doesn't actually tell you anything about what to do today, or where you want to be in 6 months, or where you want to be in a year. And it doesn't address broader issues about what is the role of outreach to the community of people on the registry and those affected by the registry while that goal is being sought. It doesn't actually tell you anything about how you would even achieve that goal. Right, so how do we dial all that back? How do we sort of plan for what we're doing in a way that's more concrete and helpful than just articulating the goals themselves? Hence, well, this isn't up. Do I start this? How do I do this? Okay, this may start blinking. If it does and it becomes seizure-inducing, someone please tell me, because that was exactly right. So, you know, I basically want to sort of put out this idea. This is from nothing but my own head thinking about it. So if it works, great. If it sparks you to come up with a different sort of way to analyze this, great. But I just wanted to sort of present to you what I was thinking about it. So, I'm going to put these in order. I believe that there are basically 4 areas to think about if you're thinking about running a reform organization. What are you doing? And I'm going to argue that it starts with outreach, right? That the first and foremost thing that an organization has to do is reach out to the people that it wants to be engaged with. Second, I'm going to argue that one of the fundamental precepts, in this area at least, is education. As everyone here knows, since the genesis of modern registry laws, certainly since the Supreme Court's case in McCune v. Lyle, where they ill-advisedly said this in dicta, there is the perception that the recidivism rate of sexual offenders is frightening and high. That is false. It's just categorically false. There's no evidence to support that. And in fact, you can see in litigation, you can see governments going through iterations of different arguments to try and get around the fact that it's false. Each argument then ultimately failing because it is false. But we are sort of fundamentally dealing in a world where anyone who's not familiar with registry laws, anyone who is not educated about the reality of sexual offending, the recidivism rates of persons convicted of sexual offenses, the very disparate groups within this broad category that is labeled sex offender, and the different recidivism characteristics of those groups. Persons who aren't familiar with the lack of efficacy of registry laws. It is a matter of academic consensus that registry laws do not have a net benefit to the public. No matter what sort of political side you're on, they don't work. There is no serious researcher who will tell you that they do. So, for instance, as a lawyer, if I can get a case into a litigation posture where the other side has to prove that a given registry restriction works, I am very likely to win that case because I can be confident they're not actually going to produce that evidence. I may fall over on the stage, but they will still not produce that evidence. Okay. Legislation, right? Ultimately, reform is achieved through legislative change, not judicial change. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but my view, which I've expressed before, is that litigation creates the opportunity for legislative engagement. If there's no legislative engagement, what happens is what's happened in North Carolina, right? I will win a case. The legislature will pass a law that does the least amount humanly possible to claim that they have now solved the problem. I will sue them on the new law. I will win that case. They will change the law to the least amount possible, et cetera. This iteration has paid my grocery bills and repaired my deck, but it is not something that I would like to keep doing for the next 20 to 30 years as a lawyer, because it's not really moving the ball forward in a meaningful sense. Each one of these cases takes 2 to 3 years, and I'm not arguing that legislation isn't useful or litigation isn't useful. I'm not arguing that NARSOL or any local affiliate shouldn't engage in it when appropriate. I'm arguing for a view of litigation, not as the end goal, but as a tool to force legislative engagement. Because ultimately, you have to be involved enough, you have to have the legislative pull to prevent the legislature from simply reenacting a new version of the old law, or while you're over here making sure that the state can't collect internet identifiers, which is a case that is generally being won around the country. They're not over here putting Lays and S's on license plates, right? Like, it's legislative ultimately. And then finally, as I was saying, litigation is a part of this. I just want, as someone who has quite frankly done this as a business, I want to put litigation where I believe it should be in the overall scheme of what local affiliates are doing. Okay, so outreach, education, legislative, and legal. And what I'm proposing for the local affiliates is to think about it this way. To say, okay, what are the areas that we're working in, right? What are we doing as part of our overall goal? And I'm suggesting that these are a good 4. They're not the only 4. I may not be right about this, and I'm not claiming to be in any ultimate sense, but I find this really useful in my own thinking and working with the NCRSOL folks about systematizing and thinking about our actual action plans. So, what is outreach? I believe first and foremost, outreach is about publicity. You can't be effective if people don't know you exist and don't know who you are, right? And I'll talk about this a little bit more, and someone raised this just in the last talk. Every state has a registry. You know who is on the registry. If you go find them, it's going to be a lot easier for them than if they have to come find you, right? It's just fundamental, starting with who are we? We're an advocacy group for registrants. Do the registrants know that we exist? If not, then I suggest that's a great starting place for getting a meaningful reform organization off the ground. 2, outreach. What are the specific programs that your organization is offering, right? When you reach out to a registrant, what do you have to offer? And there's a lot of stuff. I've heard new ideas here in the one session I sat in on, right? We offer a class in cleaning up your online reputation. We can get that to you. We offer fearless groups. We offer, and I'll talk about this more, education. We are a referral and resource network, right? If nothing else, my sense is that much of the engagement at the local affiliates and at NARSOL itself is people calling needing information. People calling needing to know, is this legal? People calling needing to know, can they do this? Where can I go? Can you help me get a job? And that takes you back to programs, right? What programs are you offering? Well, what calls are you getting? In Durham, North Carolina, I happen to know this from work that I've done, there is an organization focused on reintegration of felons, including persons convicted of sexual offenses, into society. And that organization is well versed in the specific employment restrictions that registrants face in North Carolina, right? So our local affiliate needs to have the director of that organization's name on speed dial, right? Because when someone calls and says, one of my issues is that I'm unemployed, okay, we can start to help you with that. Publicity is backed up by programs. One of the primary programs that I think NC affiliates can do, and this is network building, is referrals, right? What are the top 5 things that we get called about? What is our answer to that person? And it's not a capacity, I don't think, that you have to have in-house, right? You can't do everything. A lot of local affiliates are one person. NCRSOL, I think, is fairly large and well organized, and it's 6. Anyone here from NCRSOL? But it's 6. Marty's saying I got that right, so I'm happy about that. But it can act first and foremost as a clearinghouse, right? And then once it's achieved that goal, based on its capacity, it can offer actual assistance to people. But in terms of outreach, what I'm suggesting is that first and foremost, make a list of all the registrants. The government's already done it for you. By design, it has also told you how to contact them. I'm a lawyer. In North Carolina, there is nothing improper about reaching out and contacting a registrant for a purpose. You may not use the registry to harass someone. You can't use the registry for an improper purpose, but that is publicly available information about where someone lives. It is okay to write them a letter and say, hi, we are an advocacy organization. These are the programs we offer. We would like to invite you to this. Here is our phone number. Call us anytime. I think that's where it starts. I think it starts second. This is all going to come together in the end, I promise. I think it starts second by having what are the programs that we offer. And the programs should be an answer to the question, what do the people that call us need, right? One thing, when I got out of law school, sort of how did I end up here today? Largely because I got out of law school and I had to go into the Army. The Army had a job for me. They were very clear what I was supposed to be doing. But when I got out of the Army, I knew that I didn't want to go work for a law firm, and I wanted to open my own shop. And I was faced with this sort of fundamental question, right? You want to open your shop, well, what do you want to do? And I got very lucky in that I was at a point in my life where I didn't have a clear sense of what I wanted to do. So I opened a shop, and I said, other lawyers called me and said, what do you do? And I said, well, what do you need? Right? I don't know. turns out there was zero need for more criminal defense attorneys in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Yeah, they had that covered. There was zero need for family law attorneys. There was zero need for employment law attorneys. There was zero need for medical law. What was needed was some guy who would just answer the phone and say, "What do you need?" "Okay, I can handle that." And one of those phone calls was from a man named Glenn Girding that some of you might know, who was, "I need someone to help me file a Section 1983 constitutional challenge to the North Carolina Primacy Statute." And because that's what was needed, that's what I did. And then once I did it, I learned that no one else did that, at least where I was at the time. And so now I did that. I got very, very lucky in that without planning, I stumbled upon the general principle of I should be doing what the people I'm trying to serve need me to be doing, rather than trying to do what I want to do and getting mad that people don't seem to want my service. Right? It seems really simple, but I have a number of friends and acquaintances who are lawyers who are in struggling solo and small practices because they are family law attorneys and they can't figure out why they're not getting hired. And the answer they're not getting hired is because if you live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and you need a family law attorney, there are 3 people who have been there for 40 years. One of them's going to help you. There's no need for what you're offering, right? You are the only game in town helping registrants. So you don't have to worry about that, right? You're not trying to distinguish yourself from the other advocacy group that offers free Coke. But it's still, I want to pitch this to you. The question is, what do registrants need? And that might vary around the country. But you'll know the answer to the question because people will call you and they will say, "This is what I need." And if they need that, if you can't provide it, try to find someone who can so that you're at least the referral center and the hub. That's what I mean by outreach. You don't have to do everything. You have to pick. You have limited resources. But what you pick to do should be a function of what is needed, whatever it is. And if it's not maybe what you went into this thinking, I encourage us all to sort of open our minds and realize that fundamentally we're trying to be servants here, right? We're not trying to achieve these goals. We don't have these objectives in a vacuum. And I don't think most of us have them because we want them, right? They're not sort of made up. We want them because they are goals that serve people. And so we start by listening to the people that we're trying to serve. Okay, education. Okay. I think the fundamental block to registry reform is public attitude and perception, right? I've heard it said many times, well, I don't want to try to get involved in changing legislative minds or in the legislative progress because it won't work. Why won't it work? Because people hate sex offenders, because it's politically easy to just always make the world harder for sex offenders, et cetera, et cetera. I don't believe that's true, and I believe that the people here that are involved in legislative activity can tell you about successes, can tell you about remarkable inroads that have been made. But I acknowledge that it's a public perception, and one of the primary goals of an advocacy organization has to be to try to change that. And so I encourage us to think of education as one of the primary things because education feeds into everything else. Right? Education feeds into the legislative project. Much of litigation around these issues is simply trying to educate judges and get into the record that, as a matter of fact, the preconceptions that the judge had going into this case are false. Who are we trying to register or educate? Well, registrants themselves. I find out tragically a lot of times that a registrant comes to my office and something has happened, and I'm looking back, and at least 4 or 5 times a year, someone comes into my office and I discover they shouldn't be registered. They've been registered for 20 years, and there's a reason under North Carolina law that that was a mistake, and I can get that undone. I talk to registrants on a fairly regular basis that don't take their kids anyplace because they don't understand the way the North Carolina primacy statute actually works. Conversely, occasionally when I'm talking to someone, they say, well, the sheriff says. So I end up writing letters to the sheriff that says, hi, I'm an attorney. This is not actually what the law says. If you disagree, please let me know. But remarkably, well, maybe not remarkably given human nature, but starting with registrants and the people who enforce registry laws, in my experience, often do not actually know what the registry laws are or what they say. And because of that, they miss out on meaningful opportunities in their lives, a lot of times. Knowledge is power, et cetera, but it actually is true, right? I'm frequently able to resolve a legal situation by communicating directly with the sheriff and saying, let's agree that this is what the law says. I'm frequently able to help registrants just by giving them information about what the actual registry law is relevant to their situation. Registrants also, of course, ties back to outreach. I told you, it's a spider web. It's amazing. Also, if you've got the programs, getting the referrals, right? Educating them about resources that are available to them. Legislators. Legislators are, if your goal is ultimately registry law reform, then legislators, I propose to you, are really your target audience in conjunction with the public, right? That's a twofold, right? Registrants and law enforcement, what you're doing there is you're really trying to assist individual registrants and communities of registrants with their lives by either talking to law enforcement about policies that don't match the law or educating registrants about their rights and how to vindicate their rights and other resources that are available to them. That's sort of one side of the house, right? One side of the house is dealing with the registry laws as they exist in your state. Okay. The second side of the house is getting those laws changed. And when you're thinking about education, you've got the one side, registrants and law enforcement, and you've got the second side, legislators and the public. And I put those together because I can go to a legislator and say, look, it is absolutely clear that registrants, in this category have very, very low recidivism rates. This makes no sense. It doesn't work. I can get the legislator to agree with me. But is the legislator going to vote for me? Well, that depends in part and parcel on that person's sense of how the public's going to react to that. It's tied together. So legislators and the public are two interconnected targets for education, just like registrants and law enforcement are two integrated targets for education. And what I'm suggesting is that your group, your local group, really has two functions, or there are two interrelated ways. Again, there's helping registrants deal with the existing laws, and then there's trying to get those laws changed for the better. Okay, and we'll talk about some practical ways to achieve these. Okay. All right, legislative. Ultimately, the first thing about working with legislatures, and I know there's more specialized talks coming up in this conference on how to do this, so I won't belabor the point, but politics is politics, right? People here probably know, like literally the word comes from the polis, the city, right? Politics means at a fundamental level having connections. Politics means forming groups of people for collective action. And this is no different. As difficult as it might be, as many obstacles as reform in this area might have, fundamentally to be successful, you have to build connections. You have to find 3 or 4 legislators, start with 1, 3 or 4 legislators who are at least sympathetic. You may have a legislator that says, I can't introduce that, or I can't vote for that. But have you got someone who agrees with you or will tell you behind closed doors, I agree with you? You have to have that in somewhere. I will tell you that in North Carolina, 2 or 3, there are 2 or 3 legislators that NCRSOL can call, get a meeting with, will listen, and will even assist if you can point out that it's not political suicide to do so. Okay. I'm checking with Marty because he's one of the guys that does this. That is true. Case studies I know. That is true in Connecticut. It is true in Arizona. It is true in enough places that I have familiarity with that I posit to you that it is possible. And if you're going to be involved in legislative reform, you have to find a legislator to listen. Another sort of related story that I'll tell you is when I decided to start my own law practice, I did not know anyone in Chapel Hill. I moved there because I did not want to live in Fayetteville, North Carolina. That's funny if any of you have ever lived in Fayetteville, because it's a dirt hole, yeah. Not that bad is how a longtime resident once described Fayetteville to me. So what I did is I went online and I found the 20 top, we were talking about Google search results, the 20 top law firms that seem to have 5 or fewer lawyers. And I cold called 20 lawyers and said, I'm a new lawyer, will you go to lunch with me? The hit rate was actually about 70%. Of those 20, 14 said, all right, sure, whatever, I'll go to lunch with you. Went to 14 lunches. Of the 14 lunches, 7 lawyers ultimately gave me some legal work in some way or another. And 3 of those actually became the people who gave me the first 10 or 20 cases of my career, which got me from no clients to 4 clients to ultimately a practice. According to our computer, I passed 1,000 clients last summer. So the point just being, right, that this is literally how it starts. It starts with literal cold calling. And the hit rate, I didn't know what it would be, but 70% pretty good. 15% of the people that I cold called eventually became meaningful resources in my professional life. And I suggest to you, if nothing else, that's literally how you would start. You would just start calling your representative and saying, this is who we are, we'd like to meet with you. I will bet that a meaningful percentage of legislators will say, I'll meet with you, right? I mean, it costs them something to say no. They're saying to a constituent base, I'm not even gonna talk to you. They'll meet with you. Of those, some smaller percentage will meaningfully engage with you, and some smaller percentage will work with you in the future. But you only need one. If you need one to introduce a bill, you need 2, you've got a coalition, right? You get 3, like you're cross-aisle communicating. This is fantastic. And also you need allies, right? And I think this is another area where, you know, there are a lot of people trying to achieve a lot of different things legislatively, but politics is politics. And our cause is not some sui generis, unique, unpopular thing that's different from every other advocacy group trying to get their stuff done. And if you think that you are, I encourage you to have more confidence, right? It's not popular. I get that, but what you are is, like everyone else, you're a group that wants political change, right? Legislators are responsive to that, and we'll talk about ways to do that. You have things in common with other groups that want legislative change, right? You have natural allies. Your cause may be unpopular. What we're trying to do might not be high on anyone's legislative priority list, but it's not unique. There are a lot of unpopular causes. We do have allies. Legislation, SMART goals. SMART goals is an acronym that basically means do something that can be done where you can define victory, right? Specific, measurable, something time-bound, achievable. Who remembers R? Realistic, yes. Great, very smart. So, you know, this is gonna vary state by state, right? But in North Carolina, for instance, there are 3 offenses where registration is based on an individualized judicial determination, right? I think it is possible, just as a legislative goal in North Carolina in the next year or so, to make misdemeanor sexual battery a a situation where registration is at the discretion of the judge. I think I'm talking to NCRSO about this, but if you're asking me what specific legislation would I introduce in North Carolina right now that I think has a chance in hell of passing that would meaningfully benefit 5,000 people? North Carolina has 28,000 registrants now, and some absurd percentage of them are misdemeanor sexual battery. That would be an amazing victory, right? I understand, right, that it's not abolishing the registry. I understand that it's not an end goal. But if you could get that changed in North Carolina, which I think is possible, you would relieve probably over the next decade 5,000 to 10,000 people from having to register. You know, and legislation's about momentum, right? So I also believe that if you get one thing tweaked in your favor, the odds of then being able to tweak something else go up, because you identify the legislators, you identify the coalition, you identify the arguments that work, you identify the process to get it put in there, et cetera, et cetera. But the point of this being that this is going to vary state by state. And there's offense and there's defense, right? Legislative defense is someone puts forth something and you just manage to have it not get passed, which is a legislative victory. And something that I encourage people to look at as both goals for their organization and as victories. Like when you're doing year-end wrap-up of things we got done this year, stopped that crazy nonsense should be right up there with achieved getting our bill passed. Stopping bad is the same as getting good in terms of a success metric, right? So look at it that way. Celebrate stopping bad when it comes to the legislature. Okay. And then legal. At lunch, I got a chance to meet the attorneys with the SLAP project. I thought that was fantastic. There are a number of attorneys here. There are more attorneys now than there certainly were 11 years ago. Jesus. 11 years ago when I brought my first case involving registry laws. The single best thing you can do in terms of legal, if you're a local advocacy organization, is know attorneys that you can refer people to. Right, and you guys tell me, but I get the sense that a very high number of calls for help ultimately boil down to legal help. I need help with this. Or requests for information that it would be really useful to have an attorney for. Recently, I was talking to an advocate in another state that I'd consulted with frequently, and she said to me, you know, we need someone like you in my state. And by someone like me, I think she just meant someone knowledgeable about the registry laws that you can call up and I can say, okay, this is the law, this is what they should do, et cetera. I said, okay, let me work on that. And so I called a friend of mine in that state who gave me a list of names, and then I did some homework and found a lawyer who had gotten sort of sucked in the way I did. She got one client who was on the registry, and then realized that this was complete and utter nonsense and a tragedy of justice, and got really invested. And I was talking to her about it, and I said, hey, would you like more of those cases? We talked about it, and she said, yeah, I really would like more of these cases. I was like, great, I know who you should talk to. And they're having lunch, I think, sometime next week. So hopefully that works. But it can be done, right? And that's, in legal, I would say that's the first thing, is identifying attorneys. Again, if you're stuck and you can do nothing else, my lived experience is you just cold call. In Arizona, Alabama, Connecticut, Florida, we've got a lot. Anyway, NARSOL actually is working on, I think has a lot of these. I would encourage the local groups to go to the NARSOL SLAP project and say, who have we got in our state? And then try to forge a direct connection with them. In Georgia, right here, I actually have the names now of 2 attorneys that I'm talking to about local issues. I know attorneys in Connecticut. There are attorneys around the country. And if you get an attorney and they say, you know, what about the business side or how does this all work, refer them to me. I can talk to them about that stuff. Second is legal defense. And this is sort of me just thinking aloud, but having some sort of fund or looking for ways to actively assist in providing legal defense to people is a service that would be incredibly valuable if it were possible to get off the ground. And then finally, litigation. To my mind, for your work, I see litigation as an important last thing, if that somehow makes sense, right? Because what I'm doing as a litigator is I'm creating the conditions to engage all this other stuff in a meaningful sense, right? When I succeed in a lawsuit, what has really happened is the legislature now has to respond or not respond, right? And it's about being positioned to influence that matters as a reform group, if that makes sense, right? It's winning the case is step one. The step two is influencing and controlling the response. I don't know why this has become a talk where I just tell stories about me 10 years ago, but the first case I ever had, yeah, I think the first case, woman's girlfriend's son, or woman's daughter's boyfriend had been allowed to live with them. And the kids had been 18 or 19. Predictably, this goes bad. The boyfriend ends up taking a scooter, borrowing $4,000 from the mom, never pays it back. Mom comes to me and is like, can we sue this kid for this? I said, yes, because I had no other clients. And the answer was, you can sue them for it. So I sue this kid, right? And it's really fantastic. I get it together, I brush up, I walk into a courthouse, there's a judge, and I've got a witness, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm just on fire. I'm explaining that he took the money and he should have paid it back, and he didn't, and we win. And my client says, and I have another thing, I say, no, we're winning, I've got this, and I do have it, and the judge rules for me, and it's fantastic, it's great. I win my first case. And we're walking out of the courthouse, and the mom is walking with me, and she's like, thank you so much, that's great. And then there's this pause, and she says, so when do I get the money? Yeah, I hadn't thought about that part. And the answer was, eventually we managed to collect about $2,000 on that. But the lesson was, winning in the legal world is only half the battle. What happens afterwards? Where is this litigation taking you? And now I know when someone comes in and say, can you sue this person? I'm like, yes, but let's talk about how much it's going to cost you to sue them. What are the odds are that we win? If we win, how are we getting the money, right? Which now is the single most important question to me when I'm advising a client about whether to sue someone. Is there actual money at the end of it, or is there, I can get you a judgment which you will never collect? Because that's losing, right? And what I'm suggesting is winning the lawsuit, but not controlling the aftermath can be losing. Because if the response is you spent all this time and money, but the law gets changed for the worse or gets changed so minimally that it doesn't really achieve your objectives, then just like defense is the same as winning, winning and losing can be the same thing in that scenario. So, how does this all go together? My pitch to you is that whatever you decide that your focus is, or if you can do all this, right? Whether your focus is this side of the house, assisting registrants living their lives under the existing laws, whether your focus is this side of the house, getting the registry laws changed, your ability to achieve your objectives as an advocacy group comes down to membership. Everything comes down to membership. Whether or not you will be an effective advocacy group ultimately comes down to whether or not you have members. And by members, I mean resources and people you can call on for whatever it is you're trying to do. It doesn't really matter if you've got great programs if no one's using them. right? You could build the best resource referral network in the world, but it's not really effective unless meaningful numbers of people are deriving benefits from them. Education, it doesn't fit as great as the other ones in, but your ability, your outreach is a function of your membership and your resources. When you go to legislative, in theory, there are 28,000 registrants in North Carolina. A meaningful percentage of them have voting rights, right? Also, as you all know, many registrants have people that care deeply about them. In North Carolina local elections, at the sort of local representative, state senator level, 28,000 votes is a massive vote block, right? If you go to a legislator and say, hi, we're NCRSOL, and I'm just using that because I'm more familiar with it. And you say, we're NCRSOL, we would like you to introduce a bill to change the law to allow judges to relieve someone from the registry obligations upon conviction for a misdemeanor. And they say, okay, why? And you give them the education, you all this. But then you also say, because we represent a membership base of 20,000 people, and we will ensure that they know that this is where they need to put money for the next election, and 5,000 of them can vote for you, and 20,000 of them can give you $10. That's a massive swing in a North Carolina state senator race, right? That's power. Legislative efforts come down to power. Power comes down to votes. Votes come down to your ability to say that you represent X. I think that's just true. Whether that's a good idea or not, whether that's the hallmark of a functioning democracy, completely separate issues we don't need to get into, but I offer to you that it's true. It's also true about building your networks. This is a little bit crass, but when I was talking to this Connecticut attorney, one of the things I was saying to them is, look, there's a whole business here, right? This actually makes me really mad. In North Carolina, there are a number of attorneys that will do deregistration petitions for a flat fee of $5,000 or $10,000. That's crazy, ridiculous, dumb, because it just doesn't take that much time, and if you know what you're doing, you should be able to do one much less expensively than that, and doing anything else is exploitative. But in my practice, because I'm fairly well known in North Carolina as someone that takes registry cases, we get 30 to 40 deregistration cases a year. I can do those for $1,500 to $2,000. If I do that 40 times a year, I have an employee whose primary job is to do that, who has, she has an entire business just doing deregistration petitions, in which she does them for a third the price of anyone else, and frankly, we do them better than anyone else in North Carolina. It's a totally viable business coming down to membership, right? I'm talking to this Connecticut attorney and saying, I can put you in touch with an organization that gets 20 calls a month from people looking for legal representation. Do you want that business? Someone does, right? Also, if you're giving people that kind of volume, right? If you are the conduit, if you're referring that kind of volume, you get to ask for some pro bono. You get that attorney on the phone and they owe you a talk. They owe you half an hour to explain a registry law. They owe you, the 1 in 10 times where you say, hey, look, this person can't pay. But again, though, the driver of all of this, the source of your effectiveness, no matter how you're looking at it, this is my big pitch, no matter what you're actually trying to do, no matter what your specific goal is, no matter whether you're left side, right side, whatever, the source of your power as a local group comes down to your membership, comes down to your ability to communicate, access, and leverage participation from sheer numbers of people. My other pitch is that I think in most states, it's going to be like North Carolina, where that number doesn't actually have to be 50,000. It doesn't have to be 40, 30. We were talking about this, Marty. Like, I think if you could get 10,000 people, I know this would vary by state, right? But, start with 1,000, right? 1,000 people, that's a number, right? If you got to 5,000, but whatever it is, whatever that number is, that's where the source of your power is coming from, almost no matter what you're doing. What? Yes. Yeah, because no matter who you're talking to, that you're talking for, the larger group of people that you can fairly represent you're speaking for, the more likely it is that the person you're talking to is going to feel pressured to do it. Or the more they're going to see an opportunity in working with you, however it goes. Same thing, and this is, if you're doing outreach, if what you want to do is you want to run programs, the more people making use of your programs, just the more good you're doing. So almost no matter what you're looking at, my pitch to you is that you want to start by focusing on membership. And it's all kind of work together, right? The better your programs, the more easy it is to recruit members. The more it's a little bit circular, right? But you can start meeting legislators without a large number of members. They'll have lunch with you. This is one of the great secrets of life. One of my friends is the CEO of a company that's now worth tens of millions of dollars. He got to start by literally just cold calling famous people and saying, "Hi, I'd like to talk to you. I have a podcast." And a remarkable percentage said, "Okay, sure, I'll go on your podcast." The power you have to just call someone up and say, "Hi, you don't know me. I would like to take you to lunch and talk to you for 45 minutes." The percentage of people that will say yes to that is really astronomical. But then, once you can tell people, we're working with the legislator, you can get more members. Once you have more members, you can work better with the legislator, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, all right, I'm running out of time because I ramble on. Okay, practical things. I've got about 10 more minutes. Something? All right, someone will tell me to stop, and then I'll go through the rest of the slides in 30 seconds. Okay. My suggestions, right, and literally these are just my suggestions, and to Bob and Susan Daly in North Carolina who might be watching, I blatantly stole these from some texts you sent me, so I acknowledge that, and therefore it's not a crime. Starting with, outreach. Start with, do you have a list of all the registrants? Do you have a mailing list? If you don't, I think you should get one. 2, a membership drive. If I'm right that ultimately your effectiveness comes from membership, then you should be actively trying to gain new members. Now, I don't want to say your primary focus should be getting new members, because I think that kind of puts two things that have to happen synergetically in a false order, right? You have to have programs to get members, you have to have legislators to entice them. You have to be offering value to get members. But I think it's fair to say that you want to keep in mind that members are what you're sort of ultimately looking for. And this is a little wacky maybe, but I guess I'm sort of suggesting that, your goal is to increase membership. The way to do that is to provide value. But rather than think about, rather than think of the other stuff, think in those terms, right? We want members. That's our goal. How do we get members? We provide value. I think to a certain extent, thinking about it that way sort of solves a little bit of the knot of how you get started. Whereas if you're sort of saying, well, we want to do this, and then wondering why you don't have members, you got to get members. And you have to figure out what do we need to do to get members? What do we have to offer? Once you have members, then you can do all sorts of things. Okay. A lot of people do this. This is just programs you can have. I think the newsletter, the action updates, comes into education. I think that's great. I think fearless groups are great. I think finding people that you can, job referral is one thing that I haven't heard things. I have 2 minutes? 20 minutes. Oh, we're golden. One thing that in North Carolina, Jobs, right? A registrant's quality of life is often very, very intricately tied to whether they can find stable employment. And registry, as everyone here knows, makes it much more harder than the simple fact of the conviction, right? The registry is its own beast. So working on that for people, finding referrals for that, I think would be very useful. You guys know the programs that the people in your state need, right? I'm just suggesting that you consciously sit down and make a list of them. And I'm suggesting that a great place to start is, what are the calls that we're getting? What are people asking for? What do they need? Then provide that, right? If someone calls you and says, hey, I really need help with this, and you say, yes, we can help you with that. By the way, do you want to be a member? Yeah, I'm guessing the answer is yes. Particularly because what do they need to do as a member? You want to sort of flash it out, right? But if you had 1,000 members paying $10 a year, you've got a $10,000 budget. And sort of it's still a numbers game. Remember, I went back to ultimately cold calling. If you've got 1,000 members, 10% of those are going to be active in some meaningful sense. Of that 100 that are active in any sense, 10% of those are going to be sort of true, consistent contributors. All right, 1% of 1,000 is still 10 people. 10 people is larger than NCRSOL, who is having a membership drive to try to get more members so that they can get more people, et cetera. Okay, education. And again, these are just meant to be ideas. This is not sort of a list. I think one of the best things and one of the not most missing things, one of the best things and one of the things that we could certainly have more of is local affiliates who understand and see themselves as information clearinghouses, if nothing else, right? If you need information, you can go to this website and we can provide information. And I think this is also where the NARSOL local affiliate partnership can really be leveraged, because NARSOL devotes a significant amount of resources to having resources, to connecting to the Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law, which is collecting resources, et cetera, et cetera. Position papers, right? And I'm just thinking outside the box. Education. There's nothing stopping you from identifying a problem and writing a letter to the people responsible for that problem to stop it. So case in point, in North Carolina, at a recent sheriff's conference, some seminar was held where the sheriffs collectively decided that what they needed to do was crack down on registrants on websites that they're not supposed to be on under North Carolina law. So, North Carolina has a law that says you're not supposed to be on any website if the terms of service of the website clearly state that someone on the registry is not allowed to use the website. And so, combined with another law that says North Carolina registrants have to provide their internet identifiers, sheriffs sent people all over the state these letters that said, you have to get off these websites. 90-day grace period, but you've got to cancel your accounts. And so I had one of my paralegals go through, and it turned out they were right about half the time. So the way this came to me is someone said, why do I have to cancel my Microsoft Xbox account? And the answer is, you don't. So I ended up writing a series of letters to various sheriffs that said, hey, that's not actually the law. Would you like to discuss it further? And in each case, the sheriffs backed off. And now they just send a letter that says, we're just making you aware that this law exists. They've backed off trying to say these specific websites. There's nothing stopping NCRSOL from doing that. Again, you can cold call anybody, right? You can write a letter to every sheriff in the state if you identify this kind of problem that says, hey, just a note, this is not what the law says. And not never, a sheriff will say, okay, you're right, we'll back off. Not always, but anecdotally, I've got about a 50% hit rate on writing sheriffs and saying to them, this isn't what the law says, I need you to stop this. About half the time they write back and say, oh, okay, fine. About half the time I end up suing them. But But things you can do. And then local participation, right? And this goes back to getting members. There's a picture in the brochure of people outside the courthouse, saying, we are NARSOL. We want to do this. Having a booth, just showing up in places where the public is and just giving out information is invaluable, increasing your profile. Again, things I thought of and stole from the dailies. Okay. Legislative. If not already doing this, if you want to have any involvement in the legislative process, the first thing you have to do is track legislation. And I believe there's a seminar at this conference, right, where someone is saying this is how you track legislation? If not, there really should be, and we should get on that. Yeah. But you got to know what bills are coming up. The earlier you start tracking a bill, the greater your ability to sideline it or derail it or get it done. It is much easier to kill a bill before it comes up for a vote, right? If people are voting on it, the ship has sailed. And I've unfortunately been in the position a number of times where I get called and say, hey, can you talk to this legislator about this bill? And I'm like, great, when's the vote? And they say it's at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I'm like, oh boy. I was hoping you were going to say in 4 months it's in judiciary, then I could have done something. But if you're tracking the bill, you're identifying what's coming up. And step one, I would argue, is you're trying to kill bad bills. Is there anyone here from Arizona, RSOL? Yeah, you guys are really good at this. The next piece. You guys are really good at showing up to public comment on stupid legislation and actually preventing it in a lot of cases. I've watched the videos of you guys do it. Good. Okay, your organization is really good at it. That can be effective. It's not always effective, but Arizona RSOL has successfully killed numerous bills that would have made the Arizona registry even suckier by showing up and just saying, no, some of your constituents are against this. Here are the facts, etc. Individual visits to legislators. Again, this is just taking them to lunch, showing up in their office. Some of you probably know the name Cindy Prizio in Connecticut. If she's watching, hi Cindy. You are my example of walking into legislator's office and just saying, this bill is stupid, or I want this bill. And Cindy is very effective at that. She literally just goes to the Capitol, stands outside people's offices until they talk to her, and then talks until they give her something. And then finally, introducing a bill. And I put this in order for a reason, right? That introducing legislation and having it have a chance of success is sort of the last step in the process, right? It's more the case of you build these connections, you identify your target audience, you become familiar with the legislative process. You become, to the extent that you can, an insider, and then that's going to tell you how to introduce a bill, what bill is likely to get passed, and how to do it that maximizes the chances of success. So specific ideas for legislature. And then legal. Best thing I think you can do as the local group is try to build an attorney network. Second is consultation. NCRSOL calls me fairly regularly and just says, hey, what is going on with this? So that they can then communicate it to their members. And I'm hoping as we get some of these initiatives off the ground, this will be something that ties back into the outreach, right? They're writing a newsletter because they have members, they're aware of specific legal questions. I, as an attorney that is happy to work with them, can give them an answer or write something from the newsletter. So we're offering that kind of concrete value. For instance, if we'd done a newsletter last quarter, it would have been, you may have gotten a letter from the sheriff that says you need to be off all these websites. That's bullshit. Here's what the law actually says. Check your websites. If you have specific questions, call me. Something like that, right? But it will maximize your ability to get the word out. And then also knowing some of your attorneys. I have a policy in my practice, and I think a lot of attorneys do. Look, if you want to talk to me for half an hour to describe your legal problem, I'm not going to charge you for that. I'm not going to charge you to listen to you and tell you, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do because of this, this, and this, and this. So being able to know attorneys that you can refer someone, both that you can consult with so that you understand the law, so you're communicating it effectively with your members, and someone that you can refer people to ask specific individualized questions, I think is again, value. I think that's a service that your members will appreciate and need, and because they appreciate and need it, they will enjoy being members, and you will be able to attract new members, which is the source of your power. And then finally, legal challenges. And again, in this presentation, I have very deliberately put legal challenges last because I believe, as I've said, that legal challenges are a driver to all the other stuff, right? They come last in one sense and first in another, in that the entire purpose of legal challenges, to my mind, is to create the conditions to have legislative success. You need to be doing all these other things first before you can have legislative success. So, to my mind, litigation is a very important piece of this, but we have to understand what it is and where it fits in the overall picture to make it truly effective, particularly at the local level. Okay, and that was about it for me. I make no claims that any of this is objectively true, but I think it is. And it's just, again, if nothing else, feel free to disagree with me about any of the specifics here. The overarching point I want to make is that I think it's important to recognize, as a collection of advocacy groups under an umbrella, that we have these sort of competing impulses. There are multiple things we could be doing. And that if we want to achieve those goals, it's important to, one, break out and identify exactly what it is we're trying to do, right? And that this is just a rubric under which we can do that thinking, right? Are we looking to assist registrants under the existing registry laws? Or are we looking to change the registry laws? Or both, right? But these are related but distinct things. And once you've sort of figured out, okay, what do we want to do, then you can sort of break it down further, right? We want to do outreach, and we want to do education. And it's by breaking it down this way. And there's no exact right way to break it down, but you got to break it down some way to get from general ideas of we want to get to Atlanta to I need to go outside, put gas in my car, get on MLK Boulevard, drive to 40, make a left, hit 85, go through Charlotte, not at 8:30 in the morning to get there, right? You got to sort of, to get to the concrete action plan, you've got to break down what you're doing in a systematized way. And what I think is a general human experience is when you've done that, then the action plan starts to sort of fall out for itself. So again, you may not have this experience, but I have become convinced by my own thinking on this, that when I break all this down and think to myself, what are we trying to do? Okay, we're trying to do outreach. Well, what does that mean? That means we want to have programs that help people. Okay, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get a legislative bill passed. Okay, what do we need to do that? We need to have connections in the legislature. When I do that, two things happen. One, it seems to become pretty simple, right? How do you pass a bill? Well, all right, I need to have a connection in the legislature. How do I get a connection in the legislature? I meet someone in the legislature. How do I do that? Well, do I know anyone? Okay, I don't know anyone. Who's my representative? What's their phone number? Will they have lunch with me? Or show up. Another effective technique. Dirty secret is that my office is quite small. If you make it into my waiting room and you're just standing there, I will talk to you because I have to, because I can't get to the bathroom without going past you. It is a very effective technique to get 20 minutes of free legal advice, to show up in my lobby and just stand there, because I don't have the heart to just leave you there and eventually I will just talk to you. Legislators, exact same thing. And then the other piece of this that I'm convinced that I'm right about is that this idea of what drives all of this? Members, ultimately, right? So where does this start? It starts with the twofold, we want members. Okay, how do we get members? We identify likely members and we reach out to them and try to convince them to become members. How are we going to convince them to become members? Well, we have programs that they need, right? Well, what programs do they need? I don't know, ask the members, right? Like when you break it all sort of down, I'm not saying it's easy, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that any of this is easy. It's time consuming, it's hard, it's frustrating, it's not simple. But at a macro level, it kind of is simple, if that makes sense, right? If you take a step back, what we need to do is relatively straightforward if we systematize it and organize it and lay out the steps. Taking those steps can be incredibly difficult, but it's not impossible. And I hope one thing you'll take from this conference is success stories, because I know there have been a lot. Arizona has stopped bills. Connecticut has gotten legislation passed. Fearless groups are up and running. NCRSOL, like I said, we have an organization in Durham that is helping people in the registry get jobs. So it is possible, and I hope you'll stay the course. Thank you. And I actually completely forgot. I don't know, do I have any more time left? I got wrapped up in the winding down. Questions? Yeah, Paul.
Well, tomorrow, Matthew Ho is doing an important workshop on lobbying for legislative change. So that is specific with someone who has been in the trenches of this for a long time. He will also be giving a talk after the banquet on Saturday night. So keep that in mind. That's tomorrow at 1:15. And then on Sunday morning, John Daw will be talking about building successful advocacy organizations in terms of incorporating all those pieces that you just talked about. So people might keep those two options in mind.
Great, thank you. Yes, ma'am. I can hear you.
This one? Okay, perfect. I'm Kim from Arizona, and we are working really hard with legislators who are hearing us. We have a stakeholders group of about 86 people. We're going to be breaking down into 5 subcategories over the next year to present legislation for 2027. There are people that are other representatives who are determined to make registrants' lives a living hell. Do I go and talk to those people? Will I have breakthrough with them? What is your thought?
I don't see how you can get worse than they're determined to make registrants' lives a living hell. Like, there's no downside. I mean, I wouldn't stake my personal happiness on them having a huge change of heart, but why not? Would be my honest question to you. What could happen in that meeting that would make it worse for you? Right? I mean, they hate your organization now. Like, that's not going to get worse. Hi.
Okay, so I'm in Florida, and we have been working our legislature very hard for the last 2 years, I guess. And interestingly, some of our, 2 of our most adamant legislators that are vehement about our cohort, they have been touched within their own families. And while they are, yep.
Ironic.
Yeah, so while they're not ready to out themselves or to be bill sponsors, I'm going to agree with what you said and what you asked. We have to build relationships, and going in and speaking to people that we know are just going to, being nice to people that we know hate our cohort will pay off with some of them, not all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it on? I just want to ask you a question based on what Kim said. Kim said that there's this population of legislators that hate them and their population. I'm shocked. But if they're very outspoken about those things and they're saying things like we really need to layer this stuff on, that's illegal. That's punishment. They can't be creating legislation to punish people that have on the registry, because the registry is not punishment, right? So, I mean, that would be something I would have a conversation with them. They need to think about what they're saying, about what they're doing, and try to win them over. But I would point that out, that, you know, the registry is not punishment, so they need to change their thinking.
There we go. First thing is, thank you for what you've decided to do with your life to help other people. It's a statement, not a question. For 25 years, I have reached out to registrants coming out of prison, coming out of community correctionals, helping them with jobs, bus passes, cell phones, food, housing, employment. So I appreciate what you've done. Of those between 200 and 300, one of the first things you do when you get out of prison is you go get an ID card so you can get a job. And time again, when I take these people between 20 and 30 years old into the BMV, in Ohio, it's required that they say, do you want to register to vote? Time and time again. No, I'm sorry, you didn't understand him correctly. He said yes. And the reason I have 100 people in here to talk to, reach out to the younger registrants and tell them, register to vote. They don't think their vote makes a difference, and it doesn't if they're not registered to vote. The other thing is, in 25 years, personally, I've written every senator and legislator in Ohio and the deans of the top 20 law schools twice. It's a couple $100. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of envelope stuffing. Ohio wanted to have everybody have fluorescent pink license plates on their cars. Well, the thing is they pissed off the breast cancer people. And they said, oh, no, fluorescent green. And they shifted it. And I wrote every legislator, every senator, deans in top 20 law schools, and then about half the media in Ohio. And when they started knocking on doors, they pulled it out of the bill. Ohio also did the same thing Ohio tried to do the same thing Georgia did. They wanted to do a 1,000-foot restriction from any school bus stop. And again, I got out the computer and the copy machine and got that one pulled before it could become a bill. But encourage people you know. In the future, please tell people, let the younger registrants know, register to vote. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Oops, I'm sorry.
That's okay. In Florida, they're not allowed to vote. I want to go back to what Paul said in the very beginning about membership. We're done? Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.